Welcome back for another market snapshot. This time we'll be covering all the new news that's come out in the last couple of months, and it's been a lot. So welcome to March Market Snapshot. Ruben, so much is happening right now. I know we normally go over some key items. So what are we going to talk about today?
So 3 things. We're going to go over the housing numbers from last month, the NHR's statistics. We're going to talk about what the Fed meeting that just happened said, what it meant, the implications for us. Then we're going to jump into just a little bit about the implications of the NAR settlement that happened that's been all over the news over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that seems like the one thing everybody keeps talking about. But let's start with what we normally talk about, as you said, the NAR housing numbers. What did February look like this year versus last year?
Yeah, so there's some good news and some bad news, right? So on a monthly basis, things are looking good. Like we're kind of trending up. Sales were up 9.5% from January, but they were down 3.3% from last year, which was pretty much as expected. When we look at inventory, it's up versus last year. The number of homes that were for sale at the end of the month were up about 10%. And month supply of inventory was also up about 11% from last year. So the inventory situation looks like it's improving. That's something we're gonna have to really keep our eyes on. But good signs so far there.
Sure.
But the challenge, right, that we're seeing right now is, low inventory, somewhat in returning demand, and it's already pushing home prices back up. Year over year, based on the NAR statistics, we saw 5.7% increase.
Wow.
So that's kind of noticeable. Like we're coming off of a year where we saw very little price movement on a national basis. Now we're 2 months in to noticeable positive movement. So something we're gonna have to keep an eye on as interest rates stay relatively high, prices coming up. There's affordability challenges there, right?
Absolutely. Because for the demand that's out there, we still have very limited inventory, which is continuing to cause a supply and demand issue, and prices are just going up and up.
Yeah, and I think some of the results we're seeing from that is increases in the number of cash buyers and investors, decreases in first-time home buyers, people who are having to finance their deals. Like the math on mortgages right now is getting increasingly challenging as rates stay elevated around 7% right now and home prices start to trend up. That 5% increase is noticeable when you're applying for a loan if you're already close to your limits.
Absolutely.
In terms of mortgage rates, right now the projections are kind of wavering. We're not sure where they're going to be at the end of the year. We think we're going to see them trending downward this year, but it's not going to be like astronomically low. We're talking about going from 7% to maybe 6%, maybe 6.5%. So not a ton of movement there. It's in the right direction, but it's going to be probably not until maybe next year that we really start to see mortgage rates start to come down some.
Gotcha.
And that's also why we're projecting home sales this year to be pretty close to where they were last year. We're 4.2 to 4.3 million sales for the total for this year is what the projections are looking like.
Okay. So not great news, not bad news, just sort of same news. And then the Fed came out and said all kinds of fun things. What did they say?
Yeah, so let's jump into that. The first, the obvious thing is did they move rates? The answer is no. They kept rates the same. That really just points to the fact that we've had 2 or 3 really strong job reports this year. And that's also been reflected in their projections. So one of the things that did change looking at next year is the rates the Federal Reserve was projecting. So as we look at that, their projection for GDP increased by basically more than 0.7%. So we went from 1.4 to 2.1% for the year. Unemployment, now they're projecting it to end of the year around 4%, where it had been 4.1%. And inflation, they're projecting to be a little bit higher. Their core PCE measure, they're projecting to be around 2.6% this year, up from what they're projecting in December of 2.4%.
So good news again, just as you said in our last one, and so did Gary, frankly, in the vision speech, is that this is going to be a slow moving train. We are not going to see big changes fast. And that's partially because this inflation number that they expected to be a little lower is now expecting to be a little higher. They're not seeing what they wanted. Did I get that right?
Yeah, one of the terms that Chairman Powell actually used in the statement several times was the word bumpy, right? So there's going to be a lot of variance in inflation this year. They see potentially ups and downs as they move to their 2% target. We should expect mortgage rates to also be bumpy. If they're going to fluctuate up and down as the market really kind of work toward figuring out what the rate path is going to be as we move through this year and then into next.
So if I'm a professional real estate agent, bumpy doesn't sound great, and yet at least I know. I know, and I can educate the consumer that I'm working with on what is the reality of what's happening. And again, as we said earlier in the program, things are not moving quickly, and don't expect to wait on the fence for mortgage rates to loosen up in order to go out and make that purchase. Buyers, especially right now, should be looking at what does that financial output look like for them? Does right now make sense? Are they in that sweet spot with their monthly mortgage payment? Because it's not going to get loosened up anytime soon with rates staying where they're at and prices continuing to increase.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're waiting for rates to come down, you might be waiting a couple of years.
Way too long.
And by then, with home prices, you may not be saving that much, right? Especially when you look at the long-term costs.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other big piece in this, of course, is what happened with this NAR settlement. That whether you're a real estate professional or a consumer watching this, you've read something on it, likely, right? It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, there's been articles in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Frankly, none of them really seem to be grasping what's going on. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what are a couple of the big changes that came out of this settlement?
There's a lot going on. And to your point, the media they're trying. And this is a hard thing, right? Even as consumers, this is why we encourage people to get with a professional, because what we do and how home sales work can be somewhat complicated. So when we talk about what happened with NAR basically just said two really key things that people need to understand. And that is, number one, buyer agreements, buyer agency agreements, or buyer representation agreements are something that should be put into play as a mandatory going forward. I think that that's okay. As a real estate professional, as a listing agent, I had to have a signed agreement. If I was going to sell your home, we had to sign an agreement that said, this is how we're going to do business together. What NAR is saying through their settlement is buyer agents need to do the same thing. And I actually think that is a benefit to the consumer, because the consumer really deserves to be educated up front about making such a big investment in their future. What it does for real estate professionals is say, I have to learn more quickly how to have these conversations with the consumer. That part, all good. And I think the media's at some rate gotten that one right. Where I think they've gotten it wrong is that compensation is still reality, right? My mom used to say, nobody gets a free lunch, right? And I think that's something a lot of us have heard. There is no free work. No human being wants to work for free. So professionals are still going to want to be paid. It's just the transparency of how they get paid that is now on the table for clarity with the consumer. And it's not that cooperating compensation went away. So I hope everybody takes that away from this conversation. If you've read that in the media, that's not necessarily true. It's just you can negotiate it now. You can have more transparency now.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. So hopefully our friends out there who are watching this are having an opportunity to speak with a professional locally, and they're learning more about this, because just like all kinds of things out there, there's two sides to every story. And consumers are spending a lot of money in real estate. They need to be educated. And I love what you bring to the table. And I hope that all of our folks out there watching are also reaching out, having these conversations locally, because that's what's most important to you, both as a real estate professional and as a buyer or a seller. So don't forget to tune in every single month. Hit that subscribe now button so you don't miss a single moment of our market snapshots. And we'll be back again next month. Thanks, Ruben.